watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now for a closer look at some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Jen Daly-Provo and Salt Lake Tribune columnist Michelle Quist. Great to have both of you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start off with a potential SCOTUS expansion. There's a bill in the nation's capital that would expand the justices by 4. Right now it doesn't seem to have the support, but still a debate that's going on across the country. Michelle, let's start with you. Your thoughts on expanding the Supreme Court. Is it necessary?
I mean, it's certainly a debate, but it's a tricky maneuver because it's always going to come back to bite you. You know, the parties go back and forth. Control of the presidency, control of the Congress goes back and forth. The fact is that, you know, out of 52 justices in the, you know, since like 1918, 24 have been appointed by Democrats and 28 have been appointed by Republicans or something like that. Don't hold me to the numbers. Majority of the decisions are unanimous. Very few times does it really matter who appointed the justices, and I think it makes more sense to just keep the 9 and not open up a can of worms for the future.
That's an interesting point you bring up, because I remember being in Washington and talking to the late Senator Hatch at the time over this Merrick Garland maneuver, which the Republicans pulled, and I said, you know, this is going to come back to haunt the Republican Party eventually, and he admitted to that. Yeah, it's going to, and that's kind of how it goes. The pendulum swings, as you mentioned, Michelle. Your thoughts, Representative?
You know, I really agree with Michelle, and my concern about these talks about expanding the number of justices on our court, I think deflects from the broader issue. And when it comes right down to it, adding 4 more justices to the court, or 1 more, or 3 more, or 10 more, whatever the number is not going to do a lot right now to restore the faith that our nation once had in its highest court. And I think the bigger problem right now is the politicization of the courts, and the tenor of the discussion around really critical legal issues. And you know, instead of falling back on a court that is increasingly partisan, we as elected officials at the local, state, and national level need to just step up to the plate and do a better job about passing policy that's responsive to what the public needs.
Michelle, interested in your thoughts on the recent rulings that we've seen. This is obviously why this is a big talking discussion right now. You know, 6-3 is a number we're starting to see quite a bit. Some big cases too, precedents of decades being overturned. Is there any reason for concern there?
I mean, there is concern with politicization of the court, but again, you know, the 6-3 number can change any day. You know, justices don't live forever. Justices don't want to work forever. Presidents go in and out from different parties. Of course, you know, overturning precedent that's been around 20, 30, 40, 50 years is obviously concerning for the American populace, and so they look more discerning and critical at the court. And I think the court, you know, is aware of that. I don't know if they care at this point, but I think at some point that the public's view will always come into play.
Representative, your thoughts on the recent rulings that we've seen that are kind of boiling this discussion to this point?
Well, I share the concern of a lot of people in my community that the overturning of Roe was just a first step toward dominoes falling on things like protecting marriage for all people who want to be married. And you know, like many discussions, there are some who just want to say, no, the court would never do that, but we never believed that. There were so many people that believed the court would never overturn Roe as well. And you know, I think that I see what's happening in Congress, efforts to, by some, to make sure that we codify protection of marriage in our nation, but I worry that too is just a political ploy and a deflection. And as I alluded earlier, I, like so many people right now, do not have a lot of faith in the decisions that the courts are going to make, and that further hostile decisions and acts on not protecting people's ability to be married and to have a family and to live the American dream is very much at risk.
Good segue into something else I really wanted to talk about, and that is the Respect of Marriage Act. We saw that pass in the House during the week with broad bipartisan support. All 4 members of Utah's delegation were among the Republicans voting in favor of that. Same-sex marriage is getting most of the attention on this, but it's more broad than that. It protects marriage for conditions of race and beyond as well. Were you surprised first to see all 4 members of Utah's delegation vote in favor of this bill, Michelle?
Yeah, I was surprised. I think none of them have admitted that, that the recent Dobbs decision could affect gay marriage, and I think that's what the concern is. Definitely, leading to this statute, that the House passed this week. But the interesting thing is that the new case that was just Roe being overturned, the Dobbs case has, it overturned Roe because it's a right to privacy. But Obergefell includes a right to marriage, a fundamental right to marriage, but also equal protection. And equal protection is in the Constitution, and you can't get around that. And I think that's probably why, Senator Romney said there's no risk here that this threat is going to come to fruition. And in fact, there is no case, there's no pending case where a court is looking to overturn that decision at this point.
Jen, your thoughts on all 4 representatives from Utah voting in favor of that bill?
So there are 2 representatives in Congress who almost always vote in ways that I wish they wouldn't, and 2 others who I more often agree with. I was surprised, pleasantly surprised. I think that given the very valid concerns, like Michelle mentioned, with Obergefell and Dobbs, that Congress shouldn't be cavalier about what may or may not happen with lawsuits and with the courts. I think that the right to privacy is very much at risk for a lot of facets of our lives, and if they can get together, pass a bipartisan bill on protecting marriage in our nation, it's irresponsible and callous to dismiss it as unnecessary, because we just don't know what's going to come in the coming months and years with regard to protecting that right.
On that note, what do you make of what we heard from Justice Thomas after the overturning of Roe v. Wade? He seemed to indicate that the court should look at other due process cases. Michelle?
Well, I mean, yeah, he seemed to indicate that everything was up in the air except for interracial marriage, which was curious because that personally affects him. I mean, obviously that's that concurring opinion, which nobody else joined, is what's driving all of these fears. But I agree. Our government is set up with 3 separate branches. They all have the duties and the obligations to perform their own responsibilities. They're each, act as check and balances on each other. And if one believes that the court isn't protecting constitutional rights, then they're going to, it's their job to do what they can to do so.
Representative, any final thoughts on what we heard out of Justice Thomas?
I often have some pretty strong opinions about what I hear from Justice Thomas, and I think that for especially regarding his own interracial marriage, lacks a lot of self-awareness and introspection on how families really could be torn apart, and again, just that cavalier attitude about how these decisions really affect real people and real families is concerning, and what I view as becoming much too prevalent and common from our Supreme Court justices.
Let's dig into that Roe v. Wade reversal a little bit more specifically here in the state of Utah. We know the trigger law here in our state has been put on hold for the second time by a judge, preliminary injunction granted. Michelle, what did you think of the legal argument from what we heard from that judge?
Well, it's interesting. In a preliminary injunction, a party has to show that there's irreparable damage and that there's a likelihood of success on the merits. And the court found both of those things existed, and that's why he entered the preliminary injunction. The first entry was a temporary restraining order, which is usually a very short period of time. It goes, until the hearing on the preliminary injunction can be had. I think it's interesting that many people have used the arguments against the ERA that an ERA type provision will protect abortion. Well, Utah has that ERA type provision in its constitution, and now we hear the opposite, that it doesn't protect abortion. That's one of the arguments that is being used in the cases before us, and I think it'll be interesting to see how those arguments play out.
Yeah, because the AG has said he does plan to appeal this to the Utah Supreme Court. Representative, how do you see this case playing out with our Supreme Court justices?
Well, we have a conservative state, conservative legislature, have had conservative governors, and I do have faith in our Supreme Court, in our state Supreme Court, in rising above the political fray on these decisions. And so it gives me hope that the decisions and the deliberation will be thoughtful and measured. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, you can talk about laws in theory all you want, but there are women and families and children who are going to be deeply harmed if this trigger law does go into effect. And I think that it is not pro-family and it is not pro-life to say that you know, implementing a law that will lead to death and harm to untold number of Utahns is unsavory and unfortunate.
Okay, we've run out of time, but Michelle, interested in your perspective on this. Do you see, yes or no, the Utah Supreme Court upholding the preliminary injunction?
Oh, yes.
You do, okay.
Yes.
All right, well, you obviously have more to say, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Very thoughtful conversation. Really appreciate both of you for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good to be here, thanks.